So, Michael, let's talk about this program that you're bringing to the Joyce, which is really exciting because this is not your typical home theater.
No, it is not. So our home is at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts at the David H. Koch Theater, State Theater. And when I became artistic director, one of the things that Paul told me after he said that I was taking over for him was to get out in the house and to start watching his work. Because when you're a dancer, you're in it, you're a part of it. You can't quite get that sense of perspective.
Right.
And before Paul was a dancer, before he was a swimmer, he was a painter. And I think painting, or the essence or the visual impact, was something that was always important to him. And he saw the stage as a frame, that the proscenium theater was a frame to whatever art. So as I've seen more and more of the repertory and learned how much the frame changes how you view art, I was thinking a lot about Paul's work, because there are some works that we do that I think take up an enormous amount of space. There's 16 dancers, they flow, and you kind of want a frame or a theater that amplifies that and celebrates that. But there's other repertoire that's incredibly intimate, incredibly radical, that I think benefits from a small, intimate venue, which is what the Joyce is. And that's true for kind of a conversation about legacy, which we'll get to in a second, about like modern dance. Like a lot of these early modern dance explorations were not huge ensembles in large spaces, unless they were outside or taking advantage of cityscapes. These were small groups of people who were experimenting in small spaces. So the idea was to create a foil for Lincoln Center, to create a program that highlighted intimate, radical works of Paul's. And I went into the vault and I started watching videos as far back as we go, and they go back to 1957. Mostly everything out of 147 dances. We have some documentation of, whether it's Paul's notebooks or video. But the idea was that before Company B, before Esplanade, before Airs and Mercuric Tidings and Promethean Fire, that there was, a 24-year-old living in New York City, part of this collective, who was asking really deep philosophical questions about dance.
And I just want to say the collective was the Dance Associates.
The Dance Associates.
That we mentioned earlier, that had many different kinds of artists in it.
All these people coming together. So, and you have Paul, who's danced with Merce at this point. He was in the company and then left. Dancing with Martha, dancing with Balanchine, Perlang, touring with Donald McHale. I mean, he's absorbing so much. So there's 6 Taylor works that are going to be coming to the Joyce. The first is from 1957, called Events 2 from 7 New Dances, which premiered at the 92nd Street Y. Hasn't been seen since '58. It's a duet for 2 women with costumes by Rauschenberg. The next is 3 solos from Images and Reflections, which he choreographed in 1958. Hasn't been seen since 1960. Again with costumes by Rauschenberg. Music by Morton Feldman, which is independent of what you're seeing. It's the most Cunningham Cage I think Paul ever got. They're like, here's the dance happening, here's the music happening, and the only crossover is by chance.
So he probably did that once and then said,
I think he did that once and then learned lessons and went forward from there. And then after that, we go to Fibers, 1960, to music by Arnold Schoenberg, which we reconstructed in 2014. We did it at Lincoln Center. I helped reconstruct it. And it's like Paul's ripping Graham off. Like you see the Graham influence, you see the use of the contraction, the shapes, but there's this fluidity and this abstraction happening to it.
It is incredible costume, right?
It's
spider-like
costumes by Ruben Tour Araturnian, and it's these straps and bands. I say bondage, and I mean that just in the sense that it's like you're incredibly strapped in. They have fencing masks on, and the women they have light faces painted in this like white cone. So it's a very space sage universe Graham fusion moment.
Can I just say what that reminds me of with the white faces painting?
Yeah.
He did a piece called Tablet. Do you know about this piece?
Yeah.
In 1960 with Pina Bausch.
Yes.
It was at Spoleto in Italy. It was
Oh.
Pina Bausch and Dan Wagner who did this duet. And the costumes were by Ellsworth Kelly.
So he's in that circle.
Yeah. Before we keep going with your program, I want to ask about the first two works that you mentioned. So they haven't been seen, and that's intentional.
Yes.
You're now bringing them back.
Yes.
So let's talk about that choice. If there's pushback, is that a personal choice? Is it an organizational choice? Like, what is that to bring back a work that was intentionally kind of placed here?
I think the foundation's been behind this idea. I think a lot of people who know Paul's works, especially the alumni, are very excited about it. I think,
and it was a historic program.
It's famous, so it's kind of like you're bringing it out, and it's famous because people left. I mean, it was so forward thinking and so philosophically uncomfortable in terms of what is movement, what is dance, that it kind of halted dance history a little bit.
And it inspired this blank piece of copy in Dance Observer. I mean, it was like 2 inches of, I've seen it, and it's blank.
It's just
this is how Louis Horst decided this is how he was going to do it. And I also think that the Y said they would never have him back after that.
I think that
they said that they did have him back, but because they saw people walk.
It was not a hit. The show was I think Paul would probably have issues with it, actually. And I mean in the sense that, like, it's a part of his artistic maturation that I don't think he often, like I've done that better elsewhere. So, but I will say the alumni engagement right now, the energy in the room is just, it's so exciting. Because you see alumni making connections like, oh, I thought he made that in hairs. No, that actually came from fibers. I thought it was in this. Oh, it actually was like it. It's like you're tracing the origins of his ideas. So that helps their understanding of lineage, and they're not even in the company currently. But what it's also doing, and this is intentional on my part, is that the dancers in the company, this next generation, in my generation, they're doing works at the same age that Paul was making these works. And they're doing them, and no one has claimed them before.
Right.
So they're getting they're claiming their new, what is their story, what is their generation going to be known for, but they're doing it not just in new work and radical new work, they're doing it in radical old work. And one of the things that we're running into in rehearsal actually is that our tendency is to codify everything. And when you go to these early works, Paul's style wasn't codified yet. So the dancers immediately go into like a known shape.
Right.
And they're like, stop it, like they have to shake it off and go to and look at the video. Do what Paul did.
Right.
Do what Toby did. Don't make it what it's become.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I see that in Trisha's work too.
It's hard, but it's so important because I think, again, it goes back, their understanding of the codification will be amplified with them by them seeing where it started.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm really excited.
I mean, I'm excited too.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic, and thank you for taking that journey with me, because I think knowing that it just gives so much more. Yeah. And I think that's important, and good for you for being able to like spend the time with the archive to bring in that's something specific from the space and being that thoughtful about.
I think the archive's a living thing.
Yeah. I
really do. We're also bringing in Oriole in honor of its 60th anniversary. And Oriole's fascinating because as I've curated the program, there's all this radical early work, and I think Oriole's the most radical thing on the program because Paul he was experimenting with all these different concepts and ideas and shapes and patterns and sounds. And the last work he made, Tracer, with Robert Rauschenberg, and the last work he made ever with Rauschenberg, which had which is to a bicycle wheel on stage that's
Yes.
cued by dancers' movements and his bike tires everywhere. Twilight Tharpa's original cast. After Tracer, you have Oriole to handle, and it's called a white ballet, but it's this beautiful, lyrical, unbound, untamed freedom to Baroque music, and it transported, or not transported, it elevated Paul's dancing and the work to a level where internationally he became, they were like, we want Oriole. And that the commercialism of it was so against what all these artists in New York were trying to uncover.
Okay.
Paul never worked with Jasper Johns again, never worked with Robert Rauschenberg.
Really?
Never, like, there was, it was a schism was created.
Because they felt Oriole was mainstream.
It was mainstream, it was old music. There was something that Paul was denying, all those questions that were being asked, that when he made Oriole, it was too much of a deviation from that. And yet Oriole is turning 60, and it's a work that's traveled the world many times over. Baryshnikov has danced it, Nuria danced. I mean, it holds a place in our canon. He made it when he was 32.
Yeah.
So we're closing that on the program, and it's not just a closer that I think people will be happy to see and will love it, but seeing all the stuff that he was making before that.
Right.
Then when you see Oriole, it's like, where did that come from? So
I have the same thing about Trisha's Set and Reset. It's like, it's so big and so popular, but if you look at the things before it, you see these smaller experimental things where sometimes people walked out. But I want to say about the archive also, in terms of Trisha Brown's work, is that the archive is also alive. The New York Public Library just acquired the bulk of Trisha's archive, but also Museum of Modern Art has some of the things, have some of her notebooks. The Walker Art Center has certain things that the Tate Modern has Set and Reset stuff. So they're in different places and there are different projects with them. The Tate Modern actually has an exhibit now on Set and Reset. So there are exhibits, there are different things that the company's doing with the archive, and I agree with you, the archive is alive.
Oh, it's very alive. We control dancers going in and out of it, but I mean, we give dancers copies of Paul's notes. They have access to the videos. They're part of the reconstruction process. We actually had two funny things happen. One is that film from the 1950s and 1960s, when it gets transferred over, tends to get flipped or sped up in terms of which we've learned. But it was through dancers looking through Paul's notes and learning Paul's notes and what he wanted that we realized that the film was flipped. That counts weren't lining up. That things were changed. Or we have a premiere footage and then Paul had notes about what he would have changed after the premiere.
So the archive is both notes and videos. And
we have costumes. We actually have a lot of these original Rauschenberg costumes.
Oh, fantastic.
Fairly delicate. But we're using those and we're redesigning because it's that material. This is like pre-lycra. This is that like heavy cotton burlap sack tight. You know what it's like, and it's just and you're like, let's find a fabric that little more luscious.
Something a little more comfortable.
Yeah, a little more comfortable. So, but we're rethinking everything in that regard.
I have a question about Paul Taylor's American Modern Dance.
Yep.
And you're in charge of this whole array of things. And you've had modern, what I think of as modern dance in I think Doris Humphrey's New Dance, or one of
we did Passacaglia.
Passacaglia. You did Passacaglia, like real American modern dance.
Although New Dance is one of Paul's favorite dances, by the way.
Oh, I know that piece, and I was in it in one reconstruction many years ago. But so you've done that. You've done like Larry Kagwin, and now you're doing Peter Chu,
Mm-hmm.
who I think of as no longer modern but postmodern.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you think of Judson Dance Theater as that sort of shift from modern to postmodern, Peter Chu is more part of that. And so how are you thinking of Paul Taylor's American modern? And also you did a piece that wasn't American at all.
Mm-hmm. The Green Table.
You did The Green Table by Kurt Yost.
Yeah.
So how are you stretching that definition?
So just so audiences tuning in know, Paul Taylor on our 60th anniversary in 2014 decided to expand the company from just doing Paul's work to doing new work and important historical work. And it was part of his vision going forward that like his company would be a home for the modern dance kind of canon, which is very expensive to like look at these works and to produce them and to find the companies that can come in and do like it's a huge undertaking. And the seed money, ironically, for that came from Paul selling for Robert Rauschenberg pieces that he had, you know, like To Pete, Love Bob, you know, like Paul sold those, and that was the seed money for this idea of this like inclusive space for modern dance.
That's one constructive thing that the art world can do. They make so much more money.
This
is true.
Thank you.
So when I look at choreographers, past and present, I'm always looking at them through the lens of the range of Paul's work. That Paul has works that are incredibly postmodern, incredibly classical, we might say. A lot of ballet companies license certain works of Paul's. We have works that are far more, I would say, like of a Broadway theater variety. And then we have works that are just like, I would say, not like they're kind of classical modern, not necessarily postmodern, but like, so we kind of, Paul's range covers the gamut. And I look for all those different facets and then find choreographers whose voices I think connect to one of those facets. So for Peter Chu, we had his world premiere in Northrop. He's going to be having his New York premiere here at the Joyce. I see Peter Chu's work. I see Scudorama. I see Syzygy. I see a little bit of Post Meridian, a little bit of Big Bertha. Michelle Manzanares, who's having her world premiere here. With Michelle, I see a little bit of Company B. I see Black Tuesday. I see more storage, speaking in tongues. So I'm looking not just at art that I like and why I want to commission this artist, but I'm also thinking for the dancers as well. Like their experience working with Peter will inform how they do those works, and vice versa. Same thing with Michelle. And same thing with the Green Table. Like when you look at historical work like that, like if Paul's roots are gesture as the source of things, the Green Table for me is it's driven by gesture at a time when gesture was driving a lot of movement creation in Germany. So it's kind of like a tapestry, you know. And if there's works that I love, like we did Set and Reset.
That's right. I know
we've done Summer Space.
That,
We don't do it.
But you brought Trisha's company.
We brought Trisha's company in to do it because who else should do it besides? So it's also looking at works that I think audiences need to see, and then who's the company to perform them. And just like one quick story, I remember I was up at Paul's house in Mattatuck, and we were having dinner one night, and there was a group of us there, and I remember he was being quiet at dinner, and Paul was an avid reader, and he loved writing, and he just started. He had this monologue. He just kind of started this monologue about the importance of my generation knowing its history, and his concern was that my generation, and it was my generation. He was like talking to all the dancers at the table. He's like, I don't think you're all reading enough. I don't think you're reading about dance enough.
Wow.
And he said, my concern is that you're all not going to know why we did what we did and what was influencing it. And then he just kind of stopped. And that was kind of the end of that like conversation that always stuck with me, that sense of origin stories I think are so important. And I think maybe it's because I'm a new leader as well, and I'm trying to find my own, like, what's going to be my legacy going forward. So going to the origins of Paul's legacy and having the dancers with me in that process, I feel like also it's new to us.
Right.
And it's new to audiences, even though it's going into the past.
That's incredible.
Well, I hope they're all reading Paul's autobiography.
That
is so well written. And it's so funny.
He's not all of it's true too. Like there's like where is he blurring the lines a little bit? Like,
right.
That never happened, you know. Like you're like.
Well, then that's up to is it Suzanne Carbonell who's doing the official?
She's doing the official biography. Yeah.
But when you do your own autobiography, you have
there's some whimsy there.
He liked that. He liked blurring those lines.
That's great. So segueing to legacy and the nowness of Trisha Brown and her work. Let's talk about that.
Well, I'm just an alum, so I'm not the one heading all this, but I'm impressed by how collective they've been about someone in the company can come up with this idea and that idea. And someone came up with the idea of doing corners, which is one section of lineup from 76 that I was one of the original people in. And so this was during early pandemic.
Okay.
And so a whole bunch of people learned the corners and made their own corners. And someone else had an idea recently about doing a huge tapestry of Trisha's work in Paris. I think it was Kathleen Fisher and Daejeon, two alums. So ideas related to Trisha's work, and I think anyone who's worked with her keeps thinking about all the things that she's done. And just recently, there was a group in Virginia, a group of alums who danced her work because the rest of the company was here preparing for the Joyce. So I think the contribution of alumni is one of the ways it's happening. And as I mentioned, in the archives in different places, the Museum of Modern Art and Tate Modern, as well as the library, these are live things. And then things like Set and Reset being in your company, and when the Limon Company was here at the Joyce, and they had the Chaconne solo done by a different person every night, there was a Trisha Brown dancer who did that too. So I know that Barbara Dufty, who's the executive director, feels that there's more kind of sharing among these legacy companies, sharing ideas and sharing dancers, and so I think that's a nice thing, even though, you know, stylistically, Paul Taylor and Trisha Brown are completely different, right? Or Limon and Trisha Brown are completely different. But as you say, looking at Paul's whole different moods and different ways that he's approached things, it's really very wide. So I think those are, you know, some of the things that are happening. And the Trisha Brown Company has other companies doing things. Obviously, Stephen Petronio is doing several of Trisha's works through his Bloodlines project. But Lyon Opera Ballet has done a number of her works. Ballet Rambert in England has the license to do Set and Reset. So there are companies all over, and Trisha is very beloved in Europe. Yeah. So there are a lot of different companies who do her work every once in a while. Those are some of the ways that it continues. I think the Cunningham, not company, but trust or foundation, they're doing interesting things considering that there's no company anymore. Right. But there's the education component, which Trisha has too, the education component. There's people pulling out these 100 solos and things like that. Yeah. There are ways that the Cunningham Foundation is keeping the Cunningham work alive without the company. Right. So I think that's really interesting. I'm very glad that the Trisha Brown Company is still going. Yeah. And that there's
we all are.
Yes. Yes. There are just so many of the works that are so beautiful that many people want to see.
And I think something that's so interesting and I find really striking when you're talking about legacy, sometimes it is, to your earlier point, I think that the new generation doesn't really understand what was happening there. So this idea of collaboration and community feels very 2020 to 2022, but that's what she's about. Yeah. That's what she's about. And so that through line makes perfect sense, I think, for anyone that comes in at any entry point, because it's not a let's try to make ourselves relevant. She is relevant, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
So then it's just about how you interact with that fact.
But this thing of collectivity started with the dance associates with,
Right.
you know, Paul Taylor doing these tiny little pieces. I know there's one piece he did at the Masters Institute called The Least Flycatcher, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, and the Jack and the Beanstalk that he did within the dance associates that I think he didn't think of himself as I'm doing this serious work now. You know, he's just like, I'm just going to try this or try that. And there were other people around doing it too, and they were sharing resources.
Right.
And that's the pandemic has made everyone go, I think we have to share
Right.
resources.
Right. Yes. It's this new idea of sharing. But
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
no, this is
It's always been
really
there.
the foundation of modern dance and at the core of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to say something?
No, I just think I feel like we're in I'm fascinated like how art responds to culture and culture responds to art and like this kind of, you know, interdependent relationship. And I think I look at the 50s and the 60s and what was happening and how artists were responding of all genres and looking at where we're at right now. And I'm like, I think the pandemic is going to usher in an era of a lot of innovation and a lot of deep questions about art making, collaboration.
Audiences,
audiences,
screens,
funding,
Yes, great, great.
I think we're asking a lot of similar questions that they were asking
Yes.
at that time.
Yes.
Lens is different, media is different, but I think, you know, why our art form, why does it matter, and where's it going? Or they're great questions to be asking, you know. So I think it's also me kind of looking back at the past to learn from it in the sense of like, okay, what did they do, how did they do it? Because everyone's checking in on each other right now.
Yeah.
You know, because this is an incredibly horrific time for the arts and for artists. And how are you doing? Is it working? How are you testing? I mean, just COVID policies alone, we've had so many conversations. I'm like, is it working? How are you doing? What's happening?
Yeah.
How many it's
man.
this sharing of information and a sharing of like, how are your artists doing?
Yeah.
How are you doing? You know, so I think it makes works made at a time where those things were being asked just as relevant.
Absolutely.
You know.
And I just want to say to the Joyce, thank you for opening up again. And it's just so great to come here. And really the one house that's all dance all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because so many of the other dance venues are now sort of multi-discipline venues.
Yes.
And it's just so great to come here and know that you're going to see great dance here.
Yeah. And that has always been the truth. Like it's dance all day, every day, and thank God for that. Because that's what we do. Great. Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Oh
you.
my
Tiffany.
gosh, this is so much fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.